Did you know that God is fine with 3, 4 or more people being in a polyamorous relationship? No? Well, neither did I. However, Brandan Robertson, a famous progressive Christian TikToker, wants you to believe exactly that. But given that he also thinks that Jesus was both gay and a racist, this isn't overly surprising. Join me for this video to find out how progressive Christianity has twisted scripture to make it fit the agenda of sexual liberalism. My name is Lucas and this is my apologetics channel Deflate. Welcome and thank you for watching. As you probably know, polyamory has been gaining popularity in Western culture. That is, the idea that a love relationship should not be limited to one man and one woman only, but open to as many people as feel comfortable sharing their love and their beds. So Brandan Robertson has a popular TikTok account with some 170,000 followers. He recently talked about polygamy and polyamory. In order to clear things up from the start, the difference between the two is the following. Polygamy is the marriage between one husband and several wives, or between one wife and several husbands. Polyamory says that there may be 2 guys and 3 girls, or 4 girls and 5 guys, or what have you. Thus, in contrast to polygamy, polyamory is not a strict one from one sex and many from the other sex type of thing. Instead, it's an open how many of each there are kind of thing. With that out of the way, let's get to the video.
Okay, so what I think you mean is polyamory, not polygamy, because polygamy is not widely practiced in our culture today, primarily because it's oppressive. But the Bible does actually condone polygamy, and polyamory is not talked about at all in the Bible. In fact, the Bible doesn't give a prescription of what any romantic relationship should look like. Instead, it gives us values. It says these relationships should be based on love, mutuality, respect, covenant, commitment. I think that 3 people can be in a loving, committed, covenant relationship. I think that because I've met them. They've been in my church. But that's also not how I choose to organize my relationships. So I think we should just choose to love everyone and call everyone to loving, committed, covenanted, respectful, mutual relationships, regardless of how many people are in it. As long as it's not abusive or oppressive, like polygamy most often is, even though the Bible seemed okay with that.
So let's see what we have here. Brandan himself is not in a polyamorous relationship, but he says that we should just call everyone to love one another regardless of the number of people a relationship is made up of. As far as polygamy is concerned, Brandan describes it as an oppressive practice that is nevertheless condoned in the Bible. And even though he mentions this kind of as an aside, it reveals something very important about his attitude towards Scripture. We'll pick up on this later. He further observes that polyamory isn't talked about at all in Scripture, and then moves on to present what is the key claim of his video, and it's this. In fact, the Bible doesn't give a prescription of what any romantic relationship should look like. Instead, it gives us values. It says these relationships should be based on love, mutuality, respect, covenant, commitment. If you've ever listened to a debate about homosexuality and Christianity, this is the classic move made by those who want you to believe that Scripture is really okay with homosexual relationships. If 2 men are committed to each other, so the argument goes, there is nothing biblically wrong with them being in a romantic relationship. And the same is the case when 2 women sincerely love each other. Brandan applies this exact tactic to set up a biblical case for polyamory. The Bible only prescribes the values for romantic relationships, is what we're told. Therefore, as long as there is love and mutuality, it simply doesn't matter how many men and women decide to share their lives together. Conclusion: polyamory is fully in line with biblical teaching. But how does Brandan reconcile that with Genesis 2, which says that a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh? Sexual union, according to the creation account, is meant for one man and one woman, that is, husband and wife, and Jesus puts his explicit stamp on approval on the design laid out in Genesis, as the Pharisees ask him about whether it is lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause. Jesus' answer: have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the 2 shall become one flesh? So Jesus confirms what Genesis 1 and 2 already establish. Man and woman are created in the image of God, and accordingly husband and wife are meant to become one flesh, one man, one woman. That's the biblical order for sexuality. Thus, it's simply not true that the Bible doesn't give a prescription of what any romantic relationship should look like. and that polyamory is therefore totally fine. I mean, I'm happy to agree with Brandan that the Bible gives us what he calls values according to which a romantic relationship is to be lived. But how come Genesis 2:24 and Matthew 19:3-5 are excluded from that list of values? I guess the right answer to that question is that this is really not a list given to us by the Bible, but a list given to us by progressive Christianity and Brandan Robertson, who twist scripture so that it fits their agenda. And as if this wasn't enough, Brandan goes on to call out the Bible for being okay with polygamy, even though it's oppressive. The first time here,
polygamy is not widely practiced in our culture today, primarily because it's oppressive. But the Bible does actually condone polygamy.
And the second time here,
as long as it's not abusive or oppressive, like polygamy most often is, even though the Bible seemed okay with that.
Now, this isn't something that's immediately obvious when you listen to Brandan, but once you think about it, what he is telling us here is essentially that his moral standard stands above the one of Scripture. Polygamy is clearly oppressive, and yet the Bible is totally fine with that, so surely I have better judgment about how we should live our relationships than the Bible does. That's essentially Brandan's message. Of course, he doesn't say this explicitly, but it's 100% implied in those two offhand remarks. In this sense, these by-the-way notes are actually anything but random. They are fully in line with the goal of progressive Christians to reinterpret biblical teaching so that it serves their call to sexual liberation. In other words, instead of teaching that man is subject to the Bible's judgment, progressive Christianity teaches that the Bible is subject to man's judgment. Now, a couple of basic comments on polygamy in the Bible are in order, since Brandan talks about it. For starters, yes, there are several stories in which the main characters are polygamists. Abraham, Jacob, David, and Solomon are probably the most well-known examples. But the fact that the Bible describes polygamous relationships doesn't mean that it condones it, any more than its description of idolatry implies that the Bible is okay with people worshipping idols. In fact, the attentive reader of the stories I just mentioned will know that the biblical writers made it a point to let the reader know, implicitly and explicitly, that polygamy, while being culturally acceptable at the time, really isn't the way to go for. What Brandan may also have in mind is the so-called law of the levirate marriage, which instituted that upon the passing of a husband, his closest male relative was to marry the left-behind widow. If that close relative was married already, this practice would lead to that man having more than one wife, in other words, polygamy. Part of the purpose of the levirate marriage was to protect the widow from the risk of economic or even sexual exploitation by bringing her into the social safety net of a family. In other words, even though polygamy may have ensued from the practice of the levirate marriage in some cases, the goal was to prevent an opportunity for oppression rather than to create one, which is the exact opposite of what Brandan claims. But besides all of that, think about the following. In his case for polyamory, Brandan told us that the Bible does not prescribe the form of romantic relationships, but only its values, that is, love, commitment, mutuality, etc. But if this is so, how can he also say that the Bible condones polygamy even though it's supposedly oppressive? You know, if the Bible is okay with supposedly oppressive relationships, as Brandan tells us, then Brandan cannot also claim that the Bible prescribes love and respect as the values for romantic relationships. It's got to be either one or the other. In other words, Brandan has ended up terribly twisting an already twisted biblical case for polyamory. All I'm saying is that Brandan is simply wrong in claiming that the Bible condones polygamy as an oppressive form of relationship, just as he is wrong in saying that the Bible is fine with polyamory because sexuality, according to the Bible, is meant for one man and one woman. Of course, neither the Bible nor God forces anyone to comply with this standard. You're free to either follow Christ and submit to His way, or to not follow Christ and have it your way, sexually and otherwise. But it doesn't make sense to both want to follow Christ and to want to have it your way. Yet it's this squaring of the circle which progressive Christianity seems to be trying to accomplish. Now, what I wonder is this, and I truly mean this: do progressive Christian influencers really believe that what they teach about things like polyamory or homosexuality is actually faithful to the Bible? Or is it the case that they perfectly know that their stance on sexuality comes at the cost of misinterpreting Scripture, but they go for it anyway while simply claiming that they're actually being faithful to the biblical text? Let me know what you think. I've got a second response video to another progressive Christian TikToker which tackles the question of whether we should all just be who we are and whether Jesus was queer. Check it out here, don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.